Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes, Illuminati on Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Billionaire George Soros is going to get control of over 220 radio stations here in the United States. Now, George Soros' fund management organization has bought up $400 million of debt in Odyssey, the number 2 U.S. radio broadcaster in the United States. And Odyssey owns New York radio stations like sports station WFAM and 1010 Wins, and also controls Los Angeles radio station KROQ. And George Soros, once this company comes completely out of bankruptcy, will possibly have complete control over all of these 220 radio stations. Now, in many of my videos, I have said those who control the money control the media, and those who control the media control the narrative. And everyone in America should be troubled that a foreign billionaire has control over 220 American radio stations, because if you have a foreign individual controlling American media, they can influence American media by controlling the narratives that in ways that are detrimental to the American people. And based on George Soros's alleged politics, he may not be the person who should be controlling media, because as somebody who has very far left leanings and is allegedly behind the support and funding of left-leaning politicians like Alvin Bragg, who creates soft on-crime policies such as giving migrants no bail for assaulting police officers and organizing with dysfunctional fake black organizations like Black Lives Matter, George Soros' viewpoints in American media could create dysfunctional narratives here in the United States. And with George Soros having complete control over American media as related to these 220 radio stations, he could use these radio stations to influence the thinking of many Americans and not really give them media that would allow them to see not only a point, but a counterpoint so that they can critically think about the content being presented to them. Because with George Soros basically owning a news station, he can go out here and make sure that the news is influenced to his personal viewpoints. And that's a real serious problem when someone owns 220 radio stations. They can use all 220 of those stations to basically try to influence people's thinking on things like the upcoming 2024 presidential election. And with George Soros basically in control of these radio stations, it's something to really think about, that as related to the Telecom Act of 1996 and how that piece of legislation has basically turned into a disaster for American media over the last 30 years. Now, back in 1996, when the Republican Congress pushed for the deregulation of American media and coerced President Bill Clinton to sign this law, they thought that deregulation would lead to more competition. Unfortunately, what has happened is we've seen a lot of consolidation of American media, and instead of us seeing the competition from many of these businesses in media, because back then under regulation you could only own one TV station, one radio station, one newspaper or magazine in a area of a country. And the whole thing is one person could only do that because they wanted to make sure there was a diversity of thought and make sure that people could not only get the point from one publisher, but also get the counterpoint from another publisher. And this would allow people to not only have competition as related to media, but also allow people to get the diversity of thought so that they could critically think about the subjects presented to them. However, in the last 20, going on 30 years since the deregulation of American media, we have seen a complete consolidation of media that has done damage to the entire American media platform. Because as we have gone from thousands of publishers and thousands of radio stations and thousands of TV stations and thousands of media platforms that were independently owned, and seeing them consolidate into what people call the Big Six media. And this Big Six has basically started to consolidate even further. We're starting to see a media platform where instead of us getting that competition that Republicans speculated we would get, we saw all of this consolidation. And instead of competition, we started to see a less output of media, such as movies and TV shows, because the number of production companies shrank, the numbers of studios distributing media shrank, and media platforms like home video wound up shrinking. And this led to there not only being less productions of movies and TV shows, less jobs for actors, less jobs for screenwriters, and has also led to us getting less viewpoints in media. And this has not been a good thing for most of the media owners, who have basically seen their business go into a major state of decline. And American media has gone into this major state of decline because instead of people going to watch a lot of corporate media, what people are doing is that they migrated over to the internet. And as they've migrated over to the internet, they have walked away from many of these companies that are a part of this media oligarchy. And as they've walked away from these corporations that are part of the media oligarchy and their media, many of these companies have basically wound up losing large chunks of their audience. And this is what's led to these companies winding, like Odyssey, winding up in debt and buying up stations that one time in the 90s were worth hundreds of billions of dollars and had large audiences. Because I remember when stations like 1010 Wins and WFAN had millions of listeners, but they have wound up with their listening base basically walking away ever since the Telecom Act of 96 led to the consolidation of media. And we've seen with the TV going digital, people not really looking to listen to any sort of mainstream television or even listen to the radio. The radio has really suffered the most because people no longer listen to radio stations in their cars anymore. Now with the advent of MP3s and now Spotify with streaming services, people can now choose the content that they want to listen to. And most people don't really care about the radio, but George Soros seems to care about the radio because he believes that he can get control and influence over people with the radio. Unfortunately, this old man basically shows how completely out of touch he is, but what he wants to do really is try to get control over the media, to control the narrative of these stations, hoping that he would be able to get influence over people. But a lot of people are not really listening to the radio. But the whole prospect of one person controlling the media really should give people pause, because one person shouldn't be able to own all of these radio stations. And we had regulations in place to prevent this until the Telecom Act came along. And the Telecom Act basically has done damage to America, because never in our country's history will we allow someone who was outside the country to be able to control our media. No, never in our country's history would we want to allow this, because we would want to make sure that we were controlling our media, and we would want to make sure that there were multiple voices out there. But sadly, because of the Telecom Act, we have one individual looking to further spread influence as related to the radio, to have control over it. And that's a very dangerous thing, because if one person can control 200 radio stations, they can create narratives against people and create narratives against people to demonize someone or have influence over someone. And that should give, again, Americans pause because this is the kind of stuff that most smart Americans would want to stand up against and demand that this Telecom Act of 96 get repealed, because this Telecom Act of 96 is one of the worst laws to come out of the night out of Bill Clinton's administration. It's a law that's basically is leading to media not being competitive, but what's happening to American media is imploding, and as it's imploding, we're seeing these radio stations falling deeper into debt because there's no competition, and with there being no competition, people don't have incentive to create content, and they'll have less incentive to create content when you have somebody who has a agenda like George Soros controlling those stations, because what we'll get on those stations is similar to what we're getting on Disney platforms, which is what Disney is producing right now with what they call their far left social justice narratives that they try to push in their comics like Marvel Comics or in their cartoons and MCU movies. Instead of us getting straight entertainment or straight media, we're going to get slanted content, and that slanted content is a desperate attempt to try to continue maintaining control over people, and that's basically what this decrepit old man George Soros is trying to do. He's basically trying to continue to try to gain control over people, and he knows that his time in this world is limited, but he wants to try to exert power over people before he leaves this world. He wants to think that he can try to be a god over people before he finally faces judgment of the Most High. And that's basically what this guy wants to do. Again, this is a decrepit old man who he knows his time is very limited in this world, but he wants to try to make his mark as related to legacy, not understanding the only legacy that's going to go on is the legacy of the Messiah as related to everything. But you still have this man who wants to make his legacy and tries to influence the world and the way people think. And it's a sad state of affairs because instead of this old man looking to get his spiritual house in order, he wants to try to create chaos on this earth. And it's sad because this man is not focused on his soul. No, he's still focused on trying to control the world, not understanding Psalms 24, verse 1, and who controls this world. That's what's really sad about George Soros. He doesn't understand who's really in charge of this world, but he's still thinking he is one of the guys running the world because he can buy these radio stations that most people aren't really listening to anymore because people are moved and migrated to digital platforms, and still trying to think he can have influence over people. And again, it's really scary that you have one person who's trying to control 220 radio stations and still trying to push an agenda as related to dying American media, because Odyssey basically is filing for bankruptcy, and the main reason why Odyssey filed for bankruptcy is because of the implosion of American media due to the Telecom Act of 1996, basically eliminating all the competition and eliminating competition for content, because most of the creators of content see no interest and have no incentive to create content on these platforms, and they have no interest in creating content on these platforms because they can't create any wealth on those platforms. Meanwhile, they can go to other platforms like Spotify and all these other platforms, create their podcasts and get paid for their podcast, own all the copyrights to their content. They have no interest in dealing with Odyssey, but George Soros, this pathetic old man, still thinks he can use this to influence people and influence things like the 2024 election, not understanding that there are new media out here like New Black Media, and new media out here like New Black Media has basically taken over the influence over the whole platform of media and are starting to have an impact on the thinking of people here in America. Now, if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my books on the SJS Direct imprint, you can find those books like the ISIS series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my black sorority novel, The Thetas, or my black vampire novel, Eternal Night. You can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, subscribe. Coming to paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus at Amazon.com and other online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.